This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
David Killingray, Black British History is happening, but what to what end?
Much excellent work has been done recently on Black British history. This rich fare consists of biographies, family histories, lengthy studies of political groups and organisations, theses and books on people in Britain, but also on the slave trade and slavery, and a broad range of studies that place Britain's black population in the context of the imperial world and the Black Atlantic. Now, when we applaud achievement, it is also useful to ask some questions about the actual endeavour. What is missing? What is new? Is it bold in challenging perceived ideas? And who is reading what has been written? Are there people, group interests, or relational networks, ideas and beliefs that have been neglected or ignored in the process? Historians are faced with a particular challenge. By writing history, they have the responsibility and also the privilege of helping to shape how the past is viewed and understood. So are historians being true to their calling to be objective and accurate in the analyses that they write? History, of course, does strange things to emotions, and not least, I think, in terms of writing about Black British history. It stokes passions for the past. It kindles fires, longings to right wrongs, and sometimes a delight in identifying and magnifying the role of heroes, and of course denigrating rogues. All of which clearly can distort vision and analysis. Let me examine some of the challenges that I see facing Black British history. First of all, its context and its dimensions. Now, I don't think there is such a thing as Black British history, any more than I think there's something called working class history, or women's history, or children's history. We might choose to study the activities and institutions of black people in Britain, but that is research into a vital aspect of British history. In doing so, the labour is for two major purposes. First, to write the largely untold history of black lives and activities, principally of interest to a contemporary black constituency, or constituencies. Never use the singular when talking about large numbers of people. And second, to bring to the attention of as many people as possible an important aspect of this country's past that has been largely ignored. Now, in any case, as Ryan has just said, Black British history is not exclusively about black communities in Britain. However distinctive a minority and wherever, it is important to see its members in the context of the larger host population, or white population in this case, with whom they interact, relate, and often intermarry. Due recognition, therefore, needs to be given to the way in which black ambitions and struggles frequently involved white Britons. We can see this in Caroline Bress's recent book on Catherine Impey, which I recommend you do read. Work on the Brotherhood movement, very little written on that, but more will be. The Pan-African Conference of 1900, which, although in the hands of people of African origin and descent, leaned heavily and eagerly on the support of humanitarian-minded whites. The small hand full of black Marxists in Europe in the 1920s and the 1930s, worked with and sometimes bitterly disagreed with their white comrades, as we see in the two very substantial books by Hakim Adi and Holger Weiss that were published in 2013. And as with the earlier African Association of the late 1890s, the League of Coloured Peoples in the 1930s-40s worked closely and profitably with its honouring white members. Secondly, direction. Now, I see a danger in black British history of a desire on the part of some to continue ploughing the same old furrows. There is more to black British history than Equiano, Mary Seacole, and C.L.R. James. This approach is sometimes marked by a lack of curiosity and, dare I call it, a comfort secured by adherence to old received opinions, and a reluctance to think beyond a polarised worldview of black people as victims involved in an heroic struggle against white racist villains. Any number of books that I could bring to you that have that kind of agenda implicit in what they say. Now, it is incumbent upon historians to be broad in reading, deep in thinking, rigorous in critical scholarship, making judgments and analyses that are firmly based on the available evidence, and, as we heard already this morning, and because the aim is to get as many people as possible to read what is written, to write text marked by clarity, but also by integrity. Over-reliance on old texts can continue to shape current views of black British history. For example, the works of Folarin, but also particularly Peter Fryer's book, which Staying Power, which was seminal at its time, and it was published in 1984. It's a book that's given good service, but it also promoted a Marxist view of the black past. It will continue to be of value, but I hope not as a touchstone, almost as a basis of critical truth. It now needs to be replaced by a broader history which takes account of the huge volume of research that has been undertaken on black British history in the last 40 years. So what is left out of the picture of black activity in Britain over the past 400 or 500 years? In addition to what I've already said, there continues to be a substantial focus on the role of the political left, particularly in the 20th century. Work which I applaud, but its rhetoric should not be allowed to frame the history of black activity and endeavour in Britain. Black British history is considerably wider and more complex than that. So may I suggest 4 examples of where we might proceed? First of all, to develop the ideas about the place of black people and their role in the English localities in the late 17th and through the 18th and into the early 19th century, the kind of work that has been pioneered by Kathy Chater's important research on that period, asking very pertinent questions that actually need to be further investigated and developed. Or if we go back a bit earlier, the kind of work that has been done by the lady in the room here, Amanda Kaufman, on the 16th and 17th century. Very important work which should be widely known. But also to act as a base for further research and inquiry. Secondly, I think more attention needs to be given to the black, let's just call them liberals and democrats, who came from the Caribbean and Africa, who shaped, for example, Pan-Africanist ideas in the 1920s and 30s. Those who congregated around people like Harold Moody and W. Arthur Lewis of the League of Coloured Peoples. The League presented another radical, and I would argue, a more dominant and effective voice Whereas Padmore, James and Jones wished to kick down the doors of government offices, and they were ignored. In contrast, Moody and Lewis and others that were of course labelled as Uncle Toms by some on the radical left, particularly by Padmore, knocked politely and were invariably admitted to present firm arguments, which admittedly led to limited results. But they did lead to limited results. And of course, when you read anything written by any of these groups, you have to ask the pertinent questions about how true is this, how valid is this. These people are actually in the business of propaganda, whatever their backgrounds. And then thirdly, there's the long-enduring, I've already referred to it, long-enduring Christian dimension to Black British history, which has largely been ignored. Less so for the late 18th century, but certainly through the 19th and into the 20th centuries. Many of the people who came from Africa and the Caribbean were practicing active Christians. The sources for inquiry into their activities, which are considerable through the period I'm talking about, and incidentally, we've talked about writers. I have got a growing sort of database which lists hundreds of black writers who had books published in Britain from 1770 through to 1950. In other words, before that great outburst of black writing, which is often called post-colonial. There are hundreds of them, and some of them were self-publishers, as was Equiano, or someone like ABC Merriman Labour, written through Negro's Spectacles, self-published in 1909. But this Christian dimension is an important one, and the sources are vast. There's not only the burgeoning ecclesiastical press, much of it now increasingly digitally indexed, but there are the missionary magazines that were produced, and a whole range of primary sources. I've recently done work on the Dr. Reverend Theophilus Scholz, who I hope his name means something to you, because when he retired from being a missionary in Africa, he set to writing anti-imperial books, which were published in Britain. And he doesn't die till probably 1939. But some of the sources for him come out of the ecclesiastical press, and particularly from the Baptist Historical Society archive in Atlanta, in the United States. These sources reveal a good deal about the lives of John Jay, Mary Prince, particularly Celestine Edwards, another great figure who spoke to large audiences in the late 19th century, Scholz himself, Amanda Smith, Thomas Brem Wilson, Ghanaian in London, who set up one of the first Pentecostal churches in 1908 in Peckham, FNEM, that's Felix Hercules, Joseph Fuller, and yes, the dozen or more black Anglican clergy, and those are just the Anglican ones, who had livings in English parishes between 1799 and 1950, about whom I've recently read. Now, not long ago, when I was dismayed to be told by the Black Cultural Archives that they had not sought to collect material generated by black churches on the very doorsteps in London. Now that seems to me to be a gross oversight. Here you have got these large dynamic aspects of black history, contemporary history, but going back to the 1950s, and yet it's material that is largely being ignored. It needs to be collected, and it needs to be properly archived so it can be used by scholars now and in the future. What about a fourth example? I think black British history, Brian has already pointed out, needs to be seen in the wider context of the Atlantic world. There's been a vast output of scholarly work on the African slave trade, but to what extent has that informed teachers in our schools in thinking about Black British history. That research clearly raises difficult questions for some about the patterns of transatlantic slave trade and the extent of West African merchants' involvement in shaping that commerce. If you're interested in this, I refer you to the recent books by Rebecca Shumway, Randy Sparks' study of the West African trade of one African port and Amabo on the Ghana coast, and a recent edition of the Journal of African History in 2014. Let me emphasise that the task of the historian in working with this kind of material is to analyse complex data and draw reasonable conclusions. Their job is not to label permanently Africans only as victims. However terrible the structural violence and the inequalities in trade which helped sustain and shape the transatlantic commerce enslaved over so many centuries. It's an odious commerce, but much of the world that historians study is also odious, and we need to look at it critically with perceptive eyes. Finally, let me say a brief word about dissemination and communication. A good deal is happening in Black British history, but there is a serious challenge as to how that new research, writing, and the ideas that it contains can reach the wider readership it deserves. Many studies appear in local and provincial publications, or they get buried in expensive scholarly books and academic journals, most of which are largely inaccessible to the vast majority of people up and down the country. With the demise of the ASA newsletter in mid-2012, as a community of scholars and enthusiasts in this area, we are actually left without a proper medium for our research and queries. Let me just give you a personal example, because I'm guilty of this, of the half dozen or more articles and chapters that I've had published relating to Black British history in the last 5 or 6 years. Most of those have gone to journals or books which are unlikely to get hold of. They've gone to places like the South African Historical Journal, the Journal of Southern African Studies. They've gone into the publication of the Proceedings of the Baptist Historical Society. They've gone into a book in Germany. And so I could go on a bit further. And you have to know about them to actually get hold of them. Now, what do we need for this? There is an urgent need to rescue the research that we're doing, that you're doing, from obscurity, or potential obscurity. And perhaps this requires a new online journal, freely accessible to all, a reference point focused on Black British history and its related overseas activities. Is it too much to ask that this meeting endorse such an idea and take action to actually put it in place? Thank you very much.